back to Magic TV. My name's Craig. It is 9 o'clock, which means it's time for another video, and today I'm going to be talking about creativity. This is going to be part one of the ultimate guide to creating a magic trick. This is going to be part one. There's going to be a few different parts. I haven't worked out how many yet, but this is going to be part one. Part one to the ultimate guide to creating a magic trick. Now, before we even start, let me tell you why I feel like I'm qualified to talk about the ultimate guide to creating a magic trick. I have been creating magic since I first got into magic. Obviously, anybody who watches this channel probably knows my journey. When I first got into magic and I was working with the Wizard Product Review, I was creating a lot of magic, and I did some of the stuff I brought out was amazing. Some of the stuff I brought out wasn't so good, and I learned a lot about creativity and about what to do and what not to do, right? I learned an awful lot about creativity. I then stepped away from the magic community and carried on creating magic. And then when I came back a couple of years ago, I carried on creating magic again. I've since brought out multiple routines and multiple tricks. Most of them are really well received. All of them really have been really well received, but I also get hired as a consultant, not just by magic companies, but by various different TV shows as well. While I was away from magic, I got hired by a whole bunch of different companies to consult on various different things. Theatre shows, TV shows, corporates, the list goes on and on. But since coming back, I've actually worked with a lot of big production companies like Murphy's, companies like 1914, companies like Penguin Magic, where I actually take something that they've got and I will deconstruct it and try and come up with lots of different ways of actually using that prop, lots of different ways of actually using it, and routines that you can do with it. And anyone's seen tricks like the Boombox by Penguin Magic, Flip Barn by Penguin Magic, the Orphic wallet, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm constantly creating magic. Some of it is great, and I will run with it. Some of it is terrible, and it'll end up in the bin. But I know an awful lot about creating and creating magic in general. So this is going to be the ultimate guide to creating a magic trick, and I'm going to go through everything that I know and everything that I do. And this is going to be part one. It's not going to be a weekly series. It's going to be, as and when. I'm not going to bombard you with this information, but if you are wanting to be a creator, or you're wanting to create magic, then this is the video series that you want to watch. And in part one, I'm going to talk about getting organized, and I'm going to be talking about having a creativity board. Because here's the thing, right? I'm not going to talk too much about marketing and sales, but anybody who watches this channel knows that I'm a fan of marketing. I love sales. My background is in marketing and sales. And one thing that anybody who's in marketing will tell you, one of the most important things is to generate as many leads as possible. And the more leads you can generate, and therefore the more leads that you're putting into your marketing funnel, ultimately the more gigs you're going to get out, the more bookings you're going to get out at the end of them going through the funnel. It's the same with creativity. You've got to be constantly creating ideas. Now, some of them are going to be good, some of them are going to be bad, and we're going to talk about inspiration. In other videos, we're going to be talking about how to find inspiration, how to get inspiration, how to become inspired. We're going to talk about all of that stuff. But right now, I want to talk about how to be organized and how to organize these different things that you're creating. And I'll tell you the way that I do it. And I use something called a creativity board, which is something I started using probably 2 or 3 years ago now. And it works really, really well for me. So what's a creativity board? I would suggest you can do this on pieces of paper or a notepad or whatever. But if I were you, I would actually have a big whiteboard in a place that you work in. So I have a big whiteboard in my office, my home office, not my office that I work in where my staff work from, in my home office. Because a lot of the time when I'm creating magic, I'll go down to my office at the bottom of my garden, and that is where I create magic, and that is where I work on ideas. It's too chaotic at the office that my staff work out of, because there's always somebody coming and asking me a question about something else. I'll constantly getting pulled in a different direction. It's very difficult to sit in that place and create because I'm just, there's so many external influences and situations that demand my attention, right? And I suppose that's the first piece of advice I can give you. Find a place that's your own, that's going to be away from distractions. You'll find it very difficult to create if you're constantly getting pulled away. It will stop you from focusing on the task at hand, if that makes sense. Now, from my point of view, that means I have to be away from my family, and it means I have to be away from my office. So I have an office at the bottom of my garden. You might have a room in your house that you can get away from your parents or your family or your wife or your kids or whatever, but you want to go for a kind of a quiet space. It doesn't have to be quiet. Somewhere that you can make it so that it's conducive to what you need in order to create. Now, a lot of the time, I'll have music playing or something like that. That does not hinder my creative process. The point, and we'll get more into this on future videos, but the point I'm trying to make here is in your space that you're planning on creating, you want to get a big whiteboard and put it on the wall. And a lot of the time, I will just sit down in my office at the bottom of my garden and I will just stare at that whiteboard. And just by staring at that whiteboard, it will help me develop routines and ideas and concepts. Because let me explain how this whiteboard works. There's 3 columns, okay? Now, the first column are ideas that I'm working on, tricks that I'm working on, okay? Now, I should point out that I have a notes page on my phone. I'm a habitual note taker. I take lots of notes all of the time. Anytime, you have to get into the habit of any time that you have an idea, even if it's a half-arsed, half-baked idea, you need to write it down in your notes page because you never know where that idea will lead. So, for example, I had an idea for a trick once, and I wrote it down, and it was a stupid trick. It wasn't going to work, but ultimately, that became the quantum deck. So any single time you have an idea, you want to write that down in your notes page, right? And then get into the habit of when you get into your creativity space, you write that down on your whiteboard. And when you write it down on your whiteboard, you take it off your phone, okay? So when you're out and about, it might be for a day, it might be for a few days, it might be for a week. Any ideas that you're getting, write them down on the notes page. And then when you get back into your office or your place where you're planning on creating, you write it into the whiteboard. And the first column are just ideas. That's all it is. It's just ideas for tricks that I might have. And I don't give that idea a name. So it's not like I'm naming the trick. So it's not like I'm thinking, so let's use the quantum deck, for example. I wouldn't think of a name of it and go, oh, the quantum deck. What I would do, however, is I would maybe write on there, card at any number with a blank deck or something like that. So I know what I'm trying to achieve, okay? So on that left-hand column, it's all ideas. Now, literally, it's just the idea. I haven't got a method for it yet. I haven't got a way of actually doing that. It's just ideas. Because the whole point of creativity is you're having to constantly come up with ideas. Well, if you're keeping track of all the ideas that you might have, some of them are ridiculous, some of them are awesome, some of them will never go any further than that first column and they'll get rubbed off, but some of them will progress along the various different columns on your board. So in that first column, just put all the ideas that you're going to have. So for example, today I wrote on my column, and it doesn't have to be tricks that you're planning on selling. It could be stuff for your act. So for example, today, while I was out and about, I was playing football with Ryland, and I had the idea of doing a mismade girl illusion, but with a teddy bear. And I had the idea of having 2 teddy bears and switching the heads around, a bit like the old duck and hen thing. So that's just gone on the whiteboard. That's an idea that I'm working on. I haven't got a method for it yet, but it's just the idea, right? Now in the next column, I will move tricks from column 1 onto column 2 when I've got a method for them, right? So when I've got a method for them, and I feel that that could be a working method, they get moved into column 2. There's 4 columns, sorry, not 3, there's 4. So column 2 is when I've got an idea for the trick, I know how I'm going to do it, but that's when it gets taken off column 1 and going into column 2. So again, using the quantum deck, for example, when I had an idea of how I wanted to achieve that trick, it moved into column 2 and it got rubbed off column 1, right? Now in column 2, I have the idea for the trick, but it's not tested, right? I need to prototype it. I need to come up with a prototype for that trick. Now, this could be where it gets a little bit tricky. And what I mean by that is when it's in column 2, it could be something that I could prototype myself relatively easily. So for example, if I've got, so, again, I'm going to use the quantum deck as an example. It wasn't difficult for me to create a prototype of the quantum deck. I knew the method that I wanted to achieve. All I had to do was go to my shed at the bottom of my garden, and I just had to apply the necessary stuff to a deck of blank cards in order to create a prototype deck. So I created the prototype there, and I was able to work it through to make sure it was going to work. And I'll tell you right now, the quantum deck did not look like it ended up looking when you bought it. Originally, there were only 4 cards, there were only 4 pairs that were prepared. And then there was a series of pencil dots on various different cards, and you had to do half passes and you had to go to pencil dots depending on the number that they named. So that first prototype, I've still got it somewhere. I worked with it, I came up with the idea of how to use it, and it ended up going in the bin because it was, well, it didn't go in the bin, it ended up going to one side. So I was like, well, hang on, I'm having to, 60% of the time, I'm having to do a pass. This really isn't workable. Let's go back to the, let's think, okay, I like the idea of using it, but let's see how we can expand on that, right? So in column 2, I've got tricks that I'm prototyping. So some of the tricks I can prototype myself. Other tricks, I can't prototype them, and I might have to go to a company. And I'll have a complete working method for the trick, and I'll be able to explain exactly how it works, but it's going to be very cost prohibitive for me to prototype it myself, and that's when I'll go to a company. So for example, I'm currently working on something with Murphy's with poker chips. I've been working with them on this for about 18 months. We've gone through about 437 prototypes. This would have cost me an absolute fortune. But I was able to turn around to Murphy's and say, right, this is the premise behind the trick. This is what it is. This is what it's based on. This is the method. Let me explain exactly how this works so you can picture just how strong this would be. And I was able to go to Murphy's and say, look, this is the concept, this is how it works. And they could immediately go, oh my God, that's amazing. Yes, now we need to have the poker chips engineered in order for me to actually work this, right? And they were like, yeah, okay, we're going to go down that, sign a contract, boom, let's go back and forth working on the prototypes, right? It's the same with a company like Alakazam, for example. Now, Alakazam, when I went to them with the Beyond Stebbins project, I prototyped that myself because it's a relatively easy thing to prototype. I prototyped it myself. Gossip, I prototyped myself. Something like, perfect example. Something like, I've got a trick coming out soon called Trivia, which you might have seen at Blackpool. It had a soft launch at Blackpool, which is like a mind reading book test type thing, but we're just based on trivia, on movie trivia. I couldn't prototype that. I had to go to Peter Nardi, and I had a conversation with him, quite a long conversation, where I explained the method, I explained how everything worked. I was like, this is how it works, but we're going to need a prototype set. He made the prototype set and sent it to me. Same with playlists that I bought out through Alakazam. I was like, this is what I want to achieve. Can we get the prototypes made, right? So a lot of the time it'll be going to another company to getting the prototypes, but only if I've got a solid method that works. If I haven't got a solid method that works, I can't go to a company, right? I have to actually have a fully fleshed out idea. But when the tricks go into column 2, that is the column where I'm prototyping the tricks, and I'm making a prototype one way or another. Either I'm making the prototype or a company's making the prototype so that I can get it and test it. Once I have a prototype, it moves from column 2 into column 3. Now, sometimes it never makes it past column 2. It'll end up either going back to column 1 or it'll end up being wiped off completely. So there are tricks where the prototype just can't be made. I've got an idea for something and it just can't be made for one reason or another. I've tried to make it myself. I can't make it myself. Other companies have said, hey, it's not possible to make that. And I've even, maybe done some research myself with various other companies. They can't make it, in which case, if that's the method that I've got and the method involves making a prototype which I can't make, it will either go back into column 1 because I need to come up with a different method for this because that's obviously going to work, or if that's genuinely the only method that I can think to making that trick work, it gets wiped off the board and it goes into a separate folder. I never get rid of anything. So if I've had an idea that gets wiped off the board, it gets put into a separate folder and I write down the idea, I write down how far I got and I make notes on why that wasn't working because, hey, things might change in 5 years' time compared to where I am right now. So just because something won't work at this point in time doesn't mean it won't change at some point down the line. Anyway, it'll either get sent back to column 1, it'll get wiped off the board. However, if I'm able to make the prototype, it moves into column 3. Now, column 3 is probably the most important part of this whole creativity journey. In column 3, that's where I'm doing research and I'm also working it in the real world. So I'm working it in the real world and I do that for a few different reasons. One, I would never put anything out that hasn't been done in the real world for a few different reasons. One, I firmly believe that every trick needs a live performance. And if I can't perform it, if I haven't had experience performing it in the real world, how can I ever expect, how can I expect people to do it if there's no live performance, right? But secondly, I'm a performing magician. I've got opportunities to perform this stuff in the real world. Other people haven't. Lloyd doesn't perform his creations in the real world. He gives it to other people, gets them to perform in the real world, which is absolutely fine. I like to perform everything myself in gigging situations or social situations or something like that. And that's where I'll be tinkering with the method. That's when I'll say, right, okay, this works, but I've now performed it 20 or 30 times and this isn't hitting like I expected it to. Why isn't this hitting like I expected it to? Well, I think it's because of this. Okay, maybe I need to change that line or I need to change that delivery or maybe I need to move the switch to this situation instead of this situation, whatever it may be, right? But the other thing I'm doing at this point is I'm also trying to find out if there's anything out there like it that's already come out. So I'm speaking to knowledgeable magicians. Even if I'm not working with Murphy's, I'll still go to Lloyd. Even if I'm not working with 1914, a lot of the time I'll still go to D. Christopher. People like Nemid Phoenix are amazing for this because, my friend Nemid Phoenix is incredibly well read. I'll go to all these various different people, and the perfect example is a trick that I've got coming out with the 1914 at some point, and it's a kind of a lottery trick. And when I originally went to the 1914 with it, they loved it. Everything was great. I then showed it to Lloyd, and Lloyd said, "Well, hang on a second, that looks similar to something else." So I had to go and check with a load of different companies. I had to find out the thing that he was talking about. It turned out it was completely different, so that was absolutely fine. But that was that whole process that kept it in column 3 for a long while, right? The other thing that I like to do when it's in column 3 is come up with alternate handlings and alternate routines for the particular thing. Because, I firmly believe that when you release a product, you have to give people as much value as possible. I don't want to just do a 10-minute tutorial that just goes, this is the trick, this is what it does, thanks very much, wham bam, thank you ma'am. I like to do longer tutorials where I go into things with a fine-tooth comb. And the only way to do that is to come up with multiple routines and multiple ideas, and that comes from it being in column 3. So in column 3, I'm testing it in the real world. Now, again, with column 3, if when I'm testing it in the real world, it's not hitting and it's not working, it's going to go eventually back to column 2. If I can't make this thing work, then it's not a viable method. It needs to go back to column 2. where, or it might even need to go back to column 1. I might need to come up with a completely different method for this. If I still like the premise, but the prototype that I'm using is just not cutting the mustard, I'm going back to column 1. Or maybe I need to tweak the prototype, in which case I'm going back to number 2, back to column 2. But that column 3 is where I'm creating all of the routines for this particular prop. Okay, then I move it into column 4, and in column 4, that's when I've got a finished product. That's when I've got something that I'm really happy with, right? That's when I've got something, and it can be years, it can be months, it can be years before it moves from 1 to 4. And it might have gone 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, whatever, and eventually get to column 4. It's very rare for it to go 1, 2, 3, 4. That hardly ever happens, right? You're going with a lot of back and forth. When it goes into column 4, I feel like it's ready. I've worked it in the real world. I feel like it's getting great reactions. It works. I've come up with a whole bunch of different things to do with it, and I've done a lot of research, and I think it's completely original to me. Then I will kind of look at it and I'll go, okay, which company does this work best for? Is this an Alakazam trick? Is it a Murphy's trick? Is it a Penguin trick? Is it a 1914 trick? What is it? What company do I think this works best for? And genuinely, some tricks will go better with certain companies and so on and so forth. And so now I might already, because I've done some research into it in column 3, I might already have somebody that I've already spoken to when it gets to column 4. That happened with the Stebbins project, for example. So I was speaking to Peter about the Stebbins project when I made my prototype in column 2. I was speaking to Peter about it, and obviously when he got to column 4, I went back to Peter, and I was like, Peter Nardi, I was like, hey, I've got this is what I'm doing with it, let me show you some of the routines, what do you think? Boom, perfect. But it very much depends on the trick and on which company I'm actually going for. And we'll talk about this in future videos, but when you are actually speaking to companies about these tricks, don't be put off if they say no. You know, they might say no. I've had people say no to me, and one of my most popular tricks, I offered it to another company that said no, and the company I offered it to that ended up taking it on wasn't the company I originally went to, and it's probably one of my most popular tricks. David Jonathan has told me the same story. When he bought out Snaps with Penguin, he offered it to other companies before he eventually settled on Penguin, and they said no. And Snaps is one of the biggest tricks of Penguin's last couple of years. So just because somebody says no, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing. The other thing is, it might not be a trick that I'm developing for a company. It might just be something that I'm developing myself. So that teddy bear thing that I told you about earlier, that isn't for a company. That isn't for me to release. It's for me to perform in my own act. So it might get to a point where it's at number 4, and it's like, yeah, that's cool. I'm happy with that. That goes straight into my working set, whatever it may be. In this case, probably in a deluxe illusion show or something like that. I don't know. But the point is, you decide as you're going through with this what you're eventually going to do with it, and that's where it goes into column 4, and that's where I'm making notes as, right, okay, so this is going to be with this, and you'll find that you're going to have lots of different tricks. I've probably got all in all about 100 tricks on my board. Currently on my board right now, I'd say there's probably about 40 or 50 in column 1. There's less in column 2. I'd say there's probably in column 2 about 10. I've got about 20 to 30 tricks in column 4, and the rest are in column 3. Like, they're all over the place, right? And and that's where having this creativity board really helps, because I speak to a lot of people and they say, oh, I really struggle with creativity. I really struggle with creating a magic trick. I just don't know what to do. I sit down to try and create and there's nothing in front of me. Well, if I ever get into that situation, I just go down into my office at the bottom of my garden. I look up at my creativity board and I've got hundreds of different things on there that I can look at, and I can pick a different one. If I'm struggling to figure out something to do with that trick, for example, I can go, right, okay, let's have a look at this one. Okay, what was that trick? That was a trick with a button, wasn't it? Okay, let me grab a button. What did I think I wanted to do with this? I wanted to do this, didn't I? Okay, and it might be that as I'm working on tricks with number 1, in column number 1, I'm creating other things that can go into number one as well. So if I'm doing a trick with a button, I'm wanting to make the button float in the air, and I'm failing to make it float in the air, but I've managed to come up with a unique penetration of a button through a hand, that might be, boom, great, that'll go straight. I've got a great working method for that. It's not what I was trying to achieve, so my floating button trick is still in number one, but I've now got in number two my button penetration trick. Right, I'm gonna prototype that, and I'm gonna get that working. I'm gonna get up and running and rocking and rolling, right? So you're constantly able to look at this board and pick things from various different phases, right? Okay, and when I go out to a gig, you know, I'll go, right, okay, I've got a gig tomorrow. I'm setting my close-up case for this gig tomorrow. What have I got in column 3 that I'm working on? Okay, I'm going to take that and I'm going to take that, and we're going to try that out and see how that works. Right, okay, so those are the two that I'm going to take. And it just, you know, and I'm sitting there in my office, and I'm going, right, okay, right, number 2. What have I got in number 2? Right, I've got this. I need to prototype that. Okay, let me go and grab my craft knife and let me go and get my my crafting table and get all Minecraft on this, you know. So the point I'm trying to make here is, by having a creativity board, you're constantly having stuff that you can work on. And it's not like I've got one thing that I'm working on all of the time and I'm stumped on it, so I'm just sitting there lost. If I get stumped with something, I just move on to a different thing, either in the same column or in a different column. And don't forget, I'm constantly adding stuff as well, because as I'm out and about and as I'm going to gigs or as I'm in the office or whatever it may be, and inspiration strikes, and as I say, we'll talk about that on another video, I'll write something down, and when I get home, it'll go straight onto the creativity board. So having this creativity board, if you're serious about creating, if you want to be a creator of magic, either for your own purposes or to ultimately release magic to the magic community, whether it be downloads or physical products or whatever, having a creativity board really helps. And it's kind of similar to something that we do in our office in the sales department. You know, we've got a sales board, and that sales board has different things, that different leads that we're working on in any given time. So it's like, okay, so you know, they've only just inquired, so they need a phone call, or we've phoned them but they want us to call back. Okay, well, you know, we've got to call back to book, or wherever it may be. There's various different leads at various different stages of conversion. Well, it's the same with the creativity board. There's many different ideas that I'm working on, and they're at various different stages of completion. And then ultimately, you want to get yourself a file for each individual trick. So when you get to a point, so I'm just working on a product at the moment, and I've got 15 routines for this thing. I've got it in column 4. I've been working on it now for the best part of 8 months. In column 3, it's been worked on in column 3 for 8 months. I've got 15 really solid routines with it. So I've now got a folder specifically for that trick, and I've written down titles and descriptions of all 15 of those tricks. So now I've got this whole finished product of everything that I need, and now I can decide what to do with it, right? So there you go. Step 1 of the ultimate guide to creativity is all about getting a creativity board. If you're serious about creating and you really want to start creating magic, get a whiteboard, stick it up on your board, on your wall, get yourself a creativity board. So there you go, guys. That is another video in the bag. Do me a favor, let me know what you think. Do you agree? Are you going to get yourself a creativity board? I want to know. Let me know if you already have a creativity board. If you are creating magic, how do you keep yourself organized? I want to know. And what sort of thing would you like to see in part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5 to the ultimate guide to creativity? Again, I would like to know, so let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget, if you want to see more videos like this, like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below. Also, please don't forget, if you haven't already done so, to go and check out the Netrix, www.thenetrix.com. You can get immediate access to the Netrix, and you can see what all the fuss is about. I'm going to be back again tomorrow with another video. Thanks very much for watching. My name's Craig from Magic TV.